The dust cloud rose like a funeral shroud against the merciless Texas sun, and Penelope Fairmont knew with absolute certainty that her life had just become impossibly complicated. She sat atop her broken-down wagon on the outskirts of Amarillo, staring at the splintered axle that had finally given up its fight against the rutted dirt road, and felt the weight of every poor decision she had made in her 22 years pressing down on her shoulders like the oppressive August heat. The wagon wheel lay at an awkward angle. The wooden spokes cracked beyond any hope of a simple repair, and her horse stood patiently in its traces, occasionally flicking its tail at the persistent flies. Penelope climbed down from the driver's seat, her traveling dress already stained with the red dust that seemed to coat everything in this part of Texas, and walked around to survey the damage more closely. The sight made her stomach drop. She knew nothing about fixing wagons, and even if she did, she had no tools, no spare parts, and most critically, no money to pay anyone who might help her. Her fingers unconsciously moved to the small leather pouch tucked into her bodice, feeling the pitiful weight of the few coins that remained from her journey. $3.40. That was all that stood between her and complete destitution. She had spent nearly everything she had getting this far, convinced that Amarillo would be the place where she could finally start fresh, finally escape the suffocating expectations of her family back in St. Louis, who had wanted her to marry a banker 3 times her age with wandering hands and whiskey breath. The year was 1883, and women like her were not supposed to strike out on their own, were not supposed to sell everything they owned to buy a ramshackle wagon and a tired horse and head west towards something that resembled freedom. But Penelope had never been particularly good at doing what she was supposed to do, which was how she found herself stranded on a dusty road with a broken wagon and dreams that suddenly seemed very foolish indeed. She heard the sound of hoofbeats before she saw the rider and instinctively straightened her spine, brushing futilely at her dusty skirts. A woman alone on the road was vulnerable in ways that made her throat tight with fear, but she refused to let that fear show on her face. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only invited trouble. The cowboy who rode up was tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, and as he drew closer, Penelope could make out more details. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that was weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on his feet, and when he reined in a respectful distance from her wagon, his eyes were the color of amber in sunlight. "Looks like you have got yourself some trouble there, miss," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the music of Texas in every syllable. He did not dismount immediately, which she appreciated. It showed respect, an acknowledgement that a strange man approaching a lone woman needed to move carefully. "The axle broke," Penelope said, lifting her chin slightly. "About a mile back, but I managed to coax it this far before it gave out completely." The cowboy nodded slowly, his gaze moving from her face to the wagon and back again. "That is a fair piece of bad luck. You heading into Amarillo?" "I am, or I was, before this happened." She gestured helplessly at the broken wheel. He finally dismounted, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of years of hard physical work, and approached the wagon. He was taller than she had realized, broad-shouldered beneath his worn shirt, and there was something about the way he carried himself that made her feel simultaneously safer and more aware of how alone they were out here. He crouched down beside the broken axle, running his hands over the damaged wood with the practiced touch of someone who understood the mechanics of such things. "This is going to need more than a quick patch job," he said after a long moment, glancing up at her. "The whole axle is cracked through and that wheel is not going to roll another foot. You have got supplies in town. Someone waiting for you." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "No," she admitted quietly. "I am new to Amarillo. I do not know anyone here." The cowboy stood, dusting off his hands on his trousers, and regarded her with those steady amber eyes. She saw the moment he understood her situation, saw the flicker of concern cross his features before he schooled them back to neutrality. "What is your name, miss?" he asked. "Penelope Fairmont," she said, then added because it seemed important somehow, "I came from St. Louis." "That is a long way to travel." He touched the brim of his hat. "I am Tucker Kendrick. My family has a ranch about 5 miles south of here. I was heading back from town when I saw your dust cloud." Tucker Kendrick. The name suited him somehow, solid and unpretentious. Penelope found herself studying his face, looking for signs of the kind of man he might be. She had gotten good at reading people during her journey west, learning to distinguish between those who might help and those who would take advantage. What she saw in Tucker Kendrick's face was honest concern and something else, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Mr. Kendrick," she began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. How did one ask for help when there was nothing to offer in return? "I can fix this," he said, sparing her the humiliation of having to ask. "I have tools back at the ranch, and I think we have some spare lumber that would work for a new axle. It will take a few hours, but I can have you rolling into Amarillo before sundown." Relief flooded through her so intensely that she felt her knees weaken. "I would be so grateful," she said, then forced herself to add, "but I must be honest with you, Mr. Kendrick. I do not have money to pay for repairs. I spent nearly everything I had getting this far, and I had hoped to find work in Amarillo before I needed to worry about expenses again." She watched his face carefully, waiting for his expression to change, for the friendliness to drain away and be replaced by the calculation she had seen too often in men's eyes when they realized she was alone and vulnerable and poor. But Tucker Kendrick just tilted his head slightly, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth that made something flutter in her chest. "I tell you what, Miss Fairmont," he said slowly, and there was warmth in his voice that made her breath catch. "Payment for fixing your wagon is one dance tonight. There is a dance at the church hall in Amarillo this evening, and I reckon I would be proud to have a partner as pretty as you. If that is agreeable, then we have got ourselves a deal." Penelope stared at him, certain she must have misheard. "A dance? That is all you want in payment?" "That is all," Tucker confirmed, and now the smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look both younger and somehow more trustworthy. "I am not much for charity, and I figure a man's labor ought to be worth something. But I am also not the sort to take advantage of someone in a difficult situation. A dance seems like fair trade to me if you are willing." She should have been suspicious. She should have questioned his motives, should have wondered what kind of man would make such an offer. But there was something in the straightforward way he looked at her, in the earnest set of his shoulders, that made her believe he meant exactly what he said. Besides, what choice did she have? She could refuse his help and remain stranded, or she could accept his peculiar terms and at least make it to Amarillo. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Kendrick," she said, extending her hand. "One dance tonight in payment for fixing my wagon." His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. Tucker Kendrick held her hand perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary before releasing it, and she saw something flicker across his face that made her wonder if he had felt it too, that sudden spark of connection. I am going to need to unhitch your horse and lead him along with us, Tucker explained, already moving toward the front of her wagon. My ranch is not far, but we will have to leave the wagon here until I can bring back what I need to fix it. You can ride with me if that is all right. The thought of riding double with him, of being that close to a man she had just met, should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, Penelope found herself oddly untroubled by the prospect. There was something about Tucker Kendrick that put her at ease despite their brief acquaintance. That is fine, she agreed. Should I bring anything from the wagon? Whatever you cannot stand to leave unguarded for a few hours, Tucker said. Though I will say we do not get much trouble on this road. Most folks around here are honest. Penelope climbed back up into the wagon and gathered the few items she considered truly valuable. Her mother's Bible, the small daguerreotype of her younger sister, and the bundle of letters that represented her only remaining connection to the life she had left behind. Everything else, her meager collection of clothes and household goods, would have to stay with the wagon and trust to the honest nature of Amarillo's citizens that Tucker seemed so confident about. When she emerged from the wagon, Tucker had already unhitched her horse and was securing the animal's lead rope to his saddle. He turned to her and held out his hand. You ever ridden double before, Miss Fairmont? Once or twice, she admitted, though it had been years since she had ridden anything but a wagon seat. Tucker swung up into his saddle with easy grace, then extended his arm down to her. Penelope grasped his hand and felt the strength in his grip as he helped her up behind him. It was awkward for a moment, finding her balance and figuring out where to put her hands, but then Tucker reached back and guided her arms around his waist. Hold on tight, he instructed. I will try to keep to an easy pace, but the sooner we get to the ranch, the sooner I can start on those repairs. Penelope wrapped her arms around his middle, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he gathered the reins. She could smell sun-warmed cotton and leather and something else, something that was distinctly him, and found herself pressing just slightly closer than was strictly necessary. It had been a long time since she had felt safe enough to be this close to anyone, and the realization caught her off guard. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the steady clop of hoofbeats and the occasional creak of saddle leather. The landscape rolled past them in shades of gold and brown, interrupted by occasional clusters of scrub brush and the distant shapes of cattle grazing on the open range. The sun beat down mercilessly, but there was something almost peaceful about the vastness of it all, the sense of space that seemed infinite compared to the cramped streets of St. Louis. What brings you to Amarillo, if you do not mind my asking? Tucker's voice broke the comfortable silence, and Penelope felt the vibration of his words through his back, where her cheek nearly rested against his shoulder. A fresh start, she said simply. I needed to be somewhere different, somewhere I could make my own choices. She felt him nod, as if that explanation made perfect sense to him. Amarillo is a good town for fresh starts, he said. Folks here do not much care about where you came from, only about the kind of person you are now. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything respectable, Penelope replied. I can read and write and do figures. I know how to sew and cook and keep house. Back in St. Louis, I worked for a dressmaker for a few years before. She trailed off, not wanting to get into the complicated reasons why she had left. Before you decided you needed that fresh start, Tucker finished for her, and there was no judgment in his tone, only understanding. I have heard Mrs. Henderson at the general store has been looking for help. She is getting on in years, and the store has been doing well enough that she could use someone to help with inventory and customers. Might be worth asking after. Thank you, Penelope said, genuinely grateful for the information. I will do that tomorrow. What about family? Tucker asked. You have people who will be worrying about you. A sister, Penelope admitted. Charlotte. She is only 16 and I hated leaving her, but I could not stay. My father was determined to marry me off to a man old enough to be my grandfather, someone who could pay off his business debts. Charlotte understood why I had to go, but it does not make being apart any easier. She felt Tucker's back stiffen slightly at the mention of her father's intentions. That is a hard thing, he said quietly. A woman should be able to choose her own future, who she wants to marry, if she wants to marry at all. I am sorry your father could not see that. The sympathy in his voice was almost undoing. Penelope blinked back sudden tears, surprised by how much his simple understanding affected her. She had spent so long defending her decision to leave, had faced so much criticism from people who thought she was being selfish or foolish, that having someone simply accept her choice without question felt like a gift. What about you? She asked, partly to change the subject and partly because she found herself genuinely curious about Tucker Kendrick. Do you have family on your ranch? My parents and my younger brother, Zachary, Tucker said. My father is Thomas Kendrick and we run cattle mostly, some horses. It is a good life, hard work but honest. Zachary is 19, thinks he knows everything there is to know about ranching, which drives our father crazy. There was affection in his voice when he spoke of his family, the kind of warmth that spoke of genuine love and connection. Do you always offer to fix stranded travelers' wagons in exchange for dances? Penelope asked, and was rewarded by the sound of Tucker's quiet laugh, a rich sound that rumbled through his chest where her arms held him. I cannot say that I have ever made that particular offer before, he admitted. But then, I have never come across anyone quite like you before either, Miss Fairmont. Before she could ask what he meant by that, they crested a small rise and the Kendrick Ranch spread out before them. It was larger than she had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings centered around a sturdy two-story house with a wide front porch. Corrals and outbuildings dotted the landscape, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful stewardship. Tucker guided his horse toward one of the larger outbuildings, a barn that stood open to the afternoon heat. A man who looked like an older version of Tucker emerged from the barn's shadowed interior, wiping his hands on a rag and squinting up at them with undisguised curiosity. Tucker, who is this you have got with you? Pa, this is Miss Penelope Fairmont, Tucker said, dismounting and then helping Penelope down with careful hands. Her wagon broke down on the Amarillo road, axle snapped clean through. I told her I would bring her here to get what I need to fix it. Thomas Kendrick was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and the same amber-colored eyes as his son. He looked Penelope over with a directness that might have been uncomfortable if not for the kindness she saw in his weathered face. Pleased to meet you, Miss Fairmont, he said, extending his hand. Looks like my son here has been playing Good Samaritan again. More like negotiating a fair trade, Tucker said with a smile. Miss Fairmont has agreed to save me a dance at tonight's gathering in exchange for the repairs. Thomas's eyebrows rose, and something that looked suspiciously like approval crossed his features. Is that so? Well, that seems like a fine arrangement to me. Tucker, you know where the spare lumber is. There should be enough good oak in the back corner to make a proper axle. I will help you load it up. I appreciate this so much, Penelope said, addressing both men. I do not know what I would have done if your son had not come along when he did. Amarillo takes care of its own, Thomas said simply. Even those who have not quite made it to Amarillo yet. You planning to settle here, Miss Fairmont? That is my hope, Penelope confirmed. "I am looking for work. Tucker mentioned that Mrs. Henderson at the general store might need help." "She does indeed," Thomas confirmed. "You should go see her tomorrow. Tell her Thomas Kendrick sent you. That should at least get you a fair hearing." A woman's voice called from the direction of the house, and they all turned to see a slender woman with graying blonde hair approaching. She wore a simple work dress with an apron, and her face lit up with curiosity when she spotted Penelope. "Tucker. Who is your guest?" The introductions were repeated, and Martha Kendrick proved to be as warm and welcoming as her husband. She insisted that Penelope come up to the house while the men prepared the repair supplies, refusing to hear any protests about being too much trouble. "Nonsense," Martha said firmly, taking Penelope's arm in a gentle but inexorable grip. "You have been stranded on the road in this heat, and you look like you could use a cool drink and a chance to freshen up. The men will be at least an hour getting everything together. Come along now." Penelope found herself swept into the Kendrick house, which was as welcoming inside as it had appeared from the outside. The interior was clean and comfortable, furnished with sturdy pieces that showed signs of use and care. Martha led her to the kitchen, where she poured cool water from an earthenware pitcher and pressed the cup into Penelope's hands. "Drink," Martha commanded gently. "You look overheated." The water was blessedly cool, and Penelope drank gratefully, not realizing until that moment how parched she had been. Martha watched her with the kind of maternal concern that made Penelope's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. It had been so long since anyone had fussed over her. "Thank you," Penelope said when she had drained the cup. "You are all being so kind to a complete stranger." "Tucker is a good judge of character," Martha said, refilling the cup without being asked. "If he brought you here, then you are worth helping. Besides, it is not as if kindness is something we have to ration out here. There is plenty to go around." A younger man appeared in the kitchen doorway, clearly just come in from outside work. He had the same dark hair and amber eyes as Tucker, though his features were still settling into maturity. This had to be Zachary, the younger brother Tucker had mentioned. "Ma, is it true Tucker brought a girl home?" Zachary asked, then stopped short when he spotted Penelope. "Oh, hello. Zachary Kendrick, where are your manners?" Martha scolded, though there was no real heat in it. "This is Miss Penelope Fairmont. Her wagon broke down and your brother is helping her fix it." "Nice to meet you, miss," Zachary said, snatching his hat off his head belatedly. "Sorry for my appearance. Been working the fence line all morning." "No apology necessary," Penelope assured him. "I appreciate your family's hospitality more than I can say." Zachary grinned, and Penelope could see the family resemblance even more clearly. "Tucker convinced you to go to the dance tonight?" he asked with barely suppressed amusement. "He has been moping all week about not having anyone to dance with." "Zachary," Martha swatted at her younger son with the towel she had been holding, "do not embarrass your brother." "It is true, though," Zachary said, dodging his mother's swat with practiced ease. "He turned down Lucy Williams just last week, said he was not interested. Then he comes riding in with the prettiest girl I have seen in ages. Kind of suspicious timing, if you ask me." "No one asked you," Martha said firmly, but Penelope caught the speculative glance the older woman directed her way, as if reassessing the situation in light of this new information. Penelope felt warmth creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the heat. The idea that Tucker had been particular about who he danced with, that he might have had some reason beyond simple kindness for offering to fix her wagon, made her heart beat faster in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. She barely knew this man. She had no business developing feelings for him based on a few hours of acquaintance and one kind gesture. But she could not deny the flutter in her chest when she thought about dancing with him tonight, about having his hands on her waist, about being held close while music played. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to think about romance, about the possibility of connection with someone. She had been too focused on survival, on escape, on just getting through each day. The idea that she might be able to want something again, might be able to hope for something beyond mere existence, was both intoxicating and frightening. Martha shooed Zachary out of the kitchen and then turned her attention back to Penelope. "Do not mind him," she said kindly. "Young men think they know everything about matters of the heart when they know absolutely nothing. Now, would you like to wash up a bit? I have a basin in the spare room and you are welcome to use it." Penelope accepted gratefully, and Martha led her to a small but comfortable bedroom on the ground floor. The older woman left her alone with a basin of water, a clean towel, and a bar of lavender-scented soap that smelled like luxury after weeks of travel. Penelope washed her face and hands, scrubbing away the layers of dust and grime that had accumulated during her journey. She unpinned her hair and tried to make herself presentable, wishing she had something better to wear than her stained traveling dress. But there was nothing to be done about that, so she did the best she could, braiding her dark hair and pinning it up in a simple but neat style. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Tucker had come in from the barn. He had removed his hat, and his hair was slightly damp, as if he too had taken a moment to wash up. His eyes found hers immediately, and Penelope saw his expression shift into something warm and appreciative. "Miss Fairmont," he said, and there was something in the way he said her name that made it sound like a caress. "We are all loaded up and ready to go. If you are ready, we can head back to your wagon and get started on those repairs." "I am ready," Penelope confirmed, acutely aware of Martha's knowing smile as she watched the two of them. "You bring her back for supper before the dance," Martha instructed Tucker. "She cannot go to a dance on an empty stomach, and I have made more than enough food." "Ma, you do not have to," Tucker started, but Martha cut him off with a look that clearly brooked no argument. "I insist," Martha said firmly. "Besides, I want to hear more about St. Louis. It has been years since I have talked to anyone from that far east." Tucker caught Penelope's eye and gave a small, helpless shrug that clearly communicated that there was no point in arguing with his mother. Penelope found herself smiling despite her earlier nervousness. "I would be honored to join you for supper, Mrs. Kendrick," Penelope said. "Martha, please," the older woman insisted. "We do not stand on ceremony around here." The ride back to the broken wagon seemed shorter than the trip to the ranch, perhaps because this time they were pulling a small cart loaded with lumber and tools, which forced Tucker to keep to a slower pace. Penelope rode beside him in the cart this time rather than behind him on the horse, and she found herself studying his profile as he drove, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way he squinted slightly against the sun, the capable way his hands held the reins. "Your family is wonderful," she said after they had been traveling for a while. "You are very lucky." "I know," Tucker agreed easily. "My parents have always believed in treating people fairly, in helping when help is needed. They taught us that what matters is not what you have but what you do with it, how you treat others. I have tried to live by that." "The offer you made to fix my wagon in exchange for a dance," Penelope said slowly, "was that really just about being fair? Or was there another reason?" Tucker was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I would be lying if I said it was purely practical," he admitted. "The truth is, Miss Fairmont, from the moment I saw you standing there beside your broken wagon, dusty and worried but refusing to let that worry show on your face, I wanted to know you better, wanted to spend time with you." The dance seemed like a way to do that without making you feel obligated to me beyond our agreed-upon transaction. Penelope felt her breath catch at his honesty. Men did not usually speak so plainly about their feelings, at least not in her limited experience. They hinted and implied and played games, but Tucker Kendrick seemed refreshingly direct. "I am glad you made that offer," she said quietly. "I am looking forward to tonight." Tucker turned to look at her then, and the smile that spread across his face was genuine and warm, and made something in Penelope's chest feel like it was opening up, like a flower turning toward the sun. They reached her wagon, still sitting forlornly by the side of the road, and Tucker immediately set to work. Penelope watched as he unloaded tools and lumber, measuring and cutting with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work many times before. He explained what he was doing as he worked, seemingly comfortable with her questions and interested in making sure she understood the process. "If you are going to be traveling alone," he explained as he fitted a new spoke into place, "you should know the basics of wagon repair. Not that I hope you will need it, but it is good knowledge to have." Penelope paid attention, genuinely interested and grateful for the information. She had learned on her journey that self-sufficiency was crucial, that being able to solve her own problems was often the difference between success and disaster. By the time Tucker was securing the repaired wheel back onto the new axle, she felt like she could at least identify the different parts and understand how they worked together. The sun was lower in the sky by the time Tucker finished, golden light slanting across the landscape and painting everything in shades of amber and honey. He stood back from the repaired wagon, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, and nodded with satisfaction. "That should hold you all the way to Amarillo and beyond," he said. "The new axle is good sturdy oak. It will not break easy." "I cannot thank you enough," Penelope said, meaning every word. "You have saved me from a terrible situation." "All I ask for is that dance," Tucker reminded her, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Though I reckon we should head back to the ranch now. My mother will have supper waiting and she does not appreciate people being late for meals." They caravaned back to the Kendrick ranch, with Penelope driving her newly repaired wagon and Tucker riding alongside on his horse. The cart he had used to transport the lumber followed behind, tethered to Penelope's wagon. The whole arrangement felt companionable, almost domestic, and Penelope found herself imagining what it would be like to do this every day, to have Tucker riding beside her as they went about the business of life. She caught herself sharply on that thought. She barely knew this man. Yes, he had been kind to her. Yes, there was an attraction that she could not deny. But she had not come all this way to immediately throw herself into another situation where her choices were not her own. She needed to establish herself in Amarillo first, needed to find work and stability before she could even think about anything else. But when Tucker glanced over at her and smiled, that smile that made her feel seen and valued and safe, Penelope could not help but smile back, could not help but acknowledge that sometimes life gave you gifts you had not known you needed. Martha had indeed prepared supper, and the Kendrick family welcomed Penelope into their evening meal with the easy warmth of people who were accustomed to extending hospitality. The food was simple but plentiful: roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from Martha's garden, and a berry pie that smelled like heaven. Penelope ate more than she had in weeks, suddenly realizing how tired she was of her own meager cooking on the trail. The conversation flowed easily around the table. Thomas asked about her journey and seemed genuinely interested in her observations about the landscape and the towns she had passed through. Zachary told amusing stories about some of the ranch hands and their various mishaps. Martha wanted to know about fashions in St. Louis, and whether it was true that women back east were wearing those scandalous new bustles that made skirts stick out in the back. Tucker mostly listened, but Penelope caught him watching her throughout the meal, his gaze thoughtful and warm. Every time their eyes met, she felt that same flutter of attraction, that same sense of possibility that both excited and unnerved her. After supper, Martha insisted that Penelope borrow a dress for the dance. "That traveling dress of yours is perfectly serviceable," Martha said diplomatically, "but a dance calls for something a bit more festive. I have a dress that I think will fit you from before age settled around my middle. It is nothing fancy, but it is clean and appropriate." The dress Martha produced was a soft blue cotton with a modest neckline and neat trim around the sleeves. It was simple but pretty, and when Penelope tried it on in the spare room, she found that it fit surprisingly well, perhaps a bit loose in the waist, but nothing that could not be remedied with the belt Martha provided. When she looked at herself in the small mirror on the dresser, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked fresh and hopeful, young in a way she had not felt in years. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Tucker waiting in the front room. He had changed into clean trousers and a white shirt, and he had shaved, the sharp angles of his jaw now clearly visible. His eyes widened when he saw her, and the look of open admiration on his face made her blush. "Miss Fairmont," he said softly, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," Penelope said, resisting the urge to smooth her borrowed skirts nervously. "Your mother was very kind to lend me this dress. It suits you," Tucker said, and then offered his arm. "Shall we? The dance starts at 7, and I promised my mother we would not be out too late." The ride into Amarillo was pleasant in the cooling evening air. Tucker had hitched a small buggy for them, explaining that it would be more comfortable than the wagon or riding double, and Penelope appreciated the thoughtfulness. As they drove, Tucker pointed out various landmarks, giving her a sense of the area's geography and helping her understand the layout of her new home. Amarillo itself was larger than Penelope had expected. A bustling town with a main street lined with businesses and side streets branching off into residential areas. The church stood near the center of town, a simple white building with a tall steeple, and the adjacent hall was already lit up with lanterns, music spilling out into the evening air. Tucker helped her down from the buggy with careful hands, and Penelope felt the now familiar spark of electricity when his fingers closed around hers. He offered his arm again, and together they walked toward the hall, joining the stream of people heading inside. The hall was crowded with what seemed like half the population of Amarillo. Families clustered together, children running between the adults, and several musicians were tuning their instruments on a small raised platform at one end of the room. The atmosphere was festive and welcoming, and Penelope felt some of her nervousness ease. This was not the formal, stuffy affairs she had attended in St. Louis. This was community in its most organic form, neighbors gathering to enjoy each other's company. Tucker was immediately greeted by several people, all curious about his companion. He introduced Penelope repeatedly, his hand warm and steady on the small of her back, and she did her best to remember names and faces. Everyone seemed friendly, and more than one person mentioned that Mrs. Henderson would indeed be glad to hear from her about work. Then the music started, a lively fiddle tune that had people immediately moving toward the center of the floor. Tucker turned to her with a questioning look. "I believe I owe you a dance," he said with a smile. "Are you ready to collect on our bargain?" Penelope placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. "I believe I am." Tucker led her onto the floor with the confidence of someone who had been dancing at these community gatherings since he was old enough to walk. He placed one hand on her waist and took her other hand in his, and they began to move with the music. Penelope had learned to dance as part of her education back in St. Louis, but this was different from the formal waltzes and reels she had practiced. This was faster, more energetic, and Tucker guided her through the steps with patient expertise, his body moving with a natural grace that made it easy to follow. They spun and stepped, weaving between other couples, and Penelope found herself laughing with the sheer joy of it. She could not remember the last time she had felt this light, this free. Tucker grinned down at her, clearly enjoying himself as well, and when the song ended they were both slightly breathless. "Another?" Tucker asked, not releasing her hand. "Yes," Penelope agreed without hesitation. They danced through several more songs, stopping occasionally for Tucker to introduce her to someone or to fetch cool cups of punch. Other men asked Penelope to dance, and Tucker stepped back graciously, but she found herself counting the minutes until she could return to his arms. There was something about the way he held her, the way they moved together, that felt right in a way she could not quite articulate. During a slower song, Tucker pulled her closer than was strictly proper, and Penelope let him, resting her head against his shoulder and feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. They swayed together, barely moving, and the rest of the room seemed to fade away until it was just the two of them and the music. "I am glad your wagon broke down," Tucker murmured against her hair, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Penelope pulled back slightly to look up at him, seeing the sincerity in his amber eyes. "Why is that?" "Because otherwise I might never have met you," Tucker said simply. "And I have a feeling that would have been a terrible loss." Her breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. This was happening too fast, she told herself. She should be more careful, more cautious. But when Tucker looked at her like that, like she was something precious and rare, all her carefully constructed walls seemed to crumble. "I am glad, too," she admitted softly. "You are not at all what I expected when I decided to come west." "What did you expect?" "Hardship, mostly," Penelope said honestly. "Difficulty and struggle. I was prepared for that. I was not prepared for kindness, for someone like you." Tucker's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her just slightly closer. "You deserve kindness, Penelope. You deserve to be treated well, to have people care about what happens to you." The use of her first name, spoken with such warmth, made something in Penelope's chest feel too big for her ribcage. She wanted to kiss him, she realized with startling clarity. Wanted to feel his lips on hers, wanted to close the small distance between them and see if the reality lived up to the promise of the connection she felt sparking between them. But they were in a public place, surrounded by people, and such behavior would be scandalous. So instead, she simply held his gaze and let herself hope that this was not just one night, not just the payment of a debt, but the beginning of something more. The evening wound down slowly, with children falling asleep on their parents' shoulders and older folks beginning to drift toward the door. Tucker and Penelope danced the last dance, another slow song that allowed them to simply sway together, and when the music finally ended, Penelope felt genuine disappointment that the night was over. Tucker drove her back to where she had left her wagon at the edge of town, having arranged earlier for it to be moved to a more secure location. He helped her up into the driver's seat, his hands lingering on her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Where will you stay tonight?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Do you have lodging arranged?" "I was planning to sleep in my wagon," Penelope admitted. "It would not be the first time. I have a bedroll and I will be fine until I can find more permanent accommodations." Tucker frowned, clearly unhappy with this arrangement. "That does not seem safe. A woman alone in a wagon, even at the edge of town." "I do not have money for a hotel," Penelope said quietly, hating to admit her poverty but knowing he would understand. "Not until I find work." Tucker was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "My mother would never forgive me if I let you sleep in your wagon when we have a perfectly good spare room at the ranch," he finally said. "Would you consider staying with us, just for a few days, until you find work and can afford a proper room? My mother would love the company, and you would be safe and comfortable." Penelope wanted to refuse on principle. She had imposed on the Kendrick family enough already. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive and safe during her long journey, recognized the wisdom in Tucker's offer. The spare room at the ranch was safe and comfortable, and Martha had already shown herself to be warm and welcoming. Pride was all well and good, but it was a poor substitute for security. "Are you certain your family would not mind?" she asked. "I am certain they would mind if you did not accept," Tucker assured her. "Please, Penelope, let us help you until you get on your feet." The use of her first name again, combined with the genuine concern in his eyes, decided her. "Then yes, thank you. I gratefully accept your family's hospitality." Tucker's face broke into a relieved smile. "Good, follow me back to the ranch. We will get you settled for the night, and tomorrow I will take you into town to speak with Mrs. Henderson about that job." The ride back to the Kendrick ranch was peaceful, the night air cool and pleasant, the sky overhead thick with stars that seemed to glow more brightly than any stars Penelope had ever seen in St. Louis. She followed Tucker's buggy in her wagon, and as she drove, she found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken in just one day. This morning, she had been alone and frightened, stranded on a dusty road with no prospects and no help. Tonight, she had a place to stay, the promise of potential employment, and most unexpectedly, the beginning of what might be a genuine connection with a good man. It felt like too much good fortune all at once, and part of her waited for the other shoe to drop, for some disaster to reveal that this was all too good to be true. But when they arrived at the ranch and Martha came out onto the porch, her face lighting up with pleasure when Tucker explained the situation, Penelope allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally changing for the better. She settled into the spare room that night with a sense of profound gratitude. The bed was comfortable, the room was clean, and through the open window she could hear the gentle sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. She thought about Tucker, about the way he had looked at her during their dances, about the feel of his hand on her waist and the warmth in his eyes. She had not come west looking for love. She had come looking for freedom, for the chance to make her own choices and live her own life. But perhaps, she thought as she drifted off to sleep, freedom and love were not mutually exclusive. Perhaps it was possible to have both if the right person came along at the right time. And Tucker Kendrick, she was beginning to suspect, might just be exactly the right person. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Penelope woke to the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from the kitchen. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, which Martha had kindly washed and dried overnight, and made her way downstairs to find the family already gathered around the breakfast table. "Good morning," Martha greeted her cheerfully. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Penelope admitted, taking the seat that Martha indicated. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "It is our pleasure," Thomas said gruffly, but there was warmth in his eyes. "Tucker says he is taking you into town this morning to speak with Addie Henderson about work." "If that is still all right," Penelope said, glancing at Tucker, who was watching her with a soft expression that made her stomach flutter. "Of course it is," Tucker confirmed. "I thought we could head in after breakfast. The store opens at 8, so if we leave around 9, we should catch Mrs. Henderson when she has time to talk." The meal was hearty and delicious, and Penelope found herself relaxing into the easy rhythm of the family's morning routine. Zachary teased Tucker gently about monopolizing Penelope's time at the dance the previous night, and Martha asked about her plans for the future. It felt almost like being part of a real family again, and Penelope had to swallow past the sudden lump in her throat. True to his word, Tucker had the buggy ready to go shortly after breakfast. The drive into Amarillo was pleasant, the morning air still cool and fresh before the heat of the day set in. Tucker pointed out more landmarks, filling in details about the town's history and the people who lived there, and Penelope absorbed it all, building a mental map of her new home. Henderson's general store was located right on the main street, a substantial building with large display windows showcasing various goods. A bell chimed as Tucker held the door open for Penelope, and she stepped inside to find herself in a well-stocked emporium that seemed to carry everything from foodstuffs to fabric to farm tools. An older woman stood behind the counter, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and spectacles perched on her nose. She looked up as they entered, and her face broke into a smile when she spotted Tucker. "Tucker Kendrick, as I live and breathe," she said warmly. "What brings you into town so early in the morning?" "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Tucker greeted her, removing his hat respectfully. "I wanted to introduce you to Miss Penelope Fairmont. She just arrived in Amarillo and is looking for work. My father mentioned you might be needing help around the store." Addie Henderson's sharp eyes turned to Penelope, assessing her with the kind of thorough evaluation that years of running a business had honed. Penelope stood straight under that scrutiny, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "Is that so?" Mrs. Henderson said slowly. "What kind of experience do you have, Miss Fairmont?" "I worked for a dressmaker in St. Louis for 3 years," Penelope said clearly. "I can read, write, and do figures. I am organized, I am not afraid of hard work, and I am honest. If you give me a chance, I will prove myself to be a valuable employee." Mrs. Henderson's lips quirked into a small smile. "Confident, are you? I like that. Too many young women these days have no backbone. Let me ask you this. A customer comes in wanting to buy 5 yards of fabric at 35 cents per yard, but she only has $1.50. What do you do?" Penelope did the math quickly in her head. 5 yards would cost $1.75, so she is short 25 cents. I would ask her if she would like to purchase 4 yards instead, which would be $1.40, and would give her change back. Or, if she absolutely needs 5 yards, I would offer to set aside the fabric and let her pay the remaining 25 cents when she is able. And if I told you she was known for never paying her debts, Mrs. Henderson pressed. Then I would kindly explain that store policy requires full payment at time of purchase, but I would still offer the option of purchasing the 4 yards she can afford, Penelope replied without hesitation. Being fair does not mean being foolish. Mrs. Henderson let out a delighted laugh. "Tucker Kendrick, where did you find this one? She has got sense and backbone both." She turned back to Penelope. "I will be honest with you, Miss Fairmont. This store is growing faster than I can manage alone. I need someone who can handle customers, keep inventory, and not fall apart when things get busy. It is 6 days a week, 9 hours a day with Sundays off. Pay is $5 a week to start, with room for increase if you prove yourself. Does that sound acceptable to you? $5 a week." It was not a fortune, but it was honest work and fair pay, and it would allow her to support herself and eventually find her own lodging. Relief and excitement flooded through Penelope in equal measure. "That sounds more than acceptable," she said, hoping her voice did not betray how desperately grateful she was for this opportunity. "When would you like me to start? How about right now? Mrs. Henderson said with a smile. No time like the present to begin learning how things work around here. Tucker, you do not mind if I steal your friend for the rest of the day, do you? Not at all, Tucker said, and Penelope could hear the pride in his voice. I will come by to collect you this evening, Penelope, if that is all right. That would be wonderful, Penelope agreed, turning to give him a grateful smile. Thank you, Tucker, for everything. His eyes held hers for a long moment, conveying things that could not be said in front of Mrs. Henderson. My pleasure, he said softly, then settled his hat back on his head and headed for the door. I will see you both later. As the door closed behind him, Mrs. Henderson let out a knowing chuckle. That young man has it bad for you, she observed, not unkindly. I have known Tucker Kendrick since he was born, and I have never seen him look at a woman the way he just looked at you. Penelope felt warmth creep up her neck. We only just met yesterday, she protested weakly. Some things do not need time, Mrs. Henderson said with a shrug. Sometimes you just know. Now, let me show you around the store, and we will see how quickly you pick things up. Penelope threw herself into learning the ins and outs of Henderson's general store with the same determination she had applied to everything else in her life. Mrs. Henderson proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but exacting, and Penelope discovered that she genuinely enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about helping customers find what they needed, about keeping the shelves organized and the inventory current. The hours passed quickly, marked by the steady stream of people coming in and out. Several customers made a point of introducing themselves when they learned she was new to town, and Penelope was struck again by the genuine warmth of Amarillo's citizens. This was a community that took care of its own, that welcomed newcomers and gave people chances to prove themselves. It was everything she had hoped for when she decided to head west. True to his word, Tucker appeared at the store just as Mrs. Henderson was preparing to close for the evening. Penelope had just finished sweeping the floor, and she looked up to find him standing in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her with that soft expression that made her heart race. "How was your first day?" he asked as she put the broom away. "Wonderful," Penelope said honestly. "Mrs. Henderson is a good teacher, and I think I am going to enjoy this work very much." "I knew you would be perfect for it," Tucker said. "Are you ready to head back to the ranch?" They said their goodbyes to Mrs. Henderson, who reminded Penelope to be there promptly at 8 the next morning, and stepped out into the cooling evening air. The buggy was waiting where Tucker had left it, and he helped Penelope up before climbing in beside her. "My mother is going to want to hear all about your day," Tucker warned with a smile. "She has been excited about having another woman in the house to talk to." "I like your mother very much," Penelope said. "Your whole family, actually. You are lucky to have them." "I know," Tucker agreed, guiding the horse out onto the main street. "They are good people, salt of the earth, as they say." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, watching the landscape transition from town to open country. Finally, Tucker spoke again, his voice careful. "Penelope, I wanted to ask you something, and I hope you will be honest with me. Do you feel like my family and I are pressuring you into anything? Offering you a place to stay, helping you find work? I would never want you to feel obligated or trapped." Penelope turned to look at him, seeing the genuine concern in his face. "Tucker, you and your family have shown me nothing but kindness. I do not feel pressured or trapped. I feel grateful and, if I am honest, a bit overwhelmed by how generous you have all been, but not in a bad way. In a way that makes me think I made the right choice in coming to Amarillo." Tucker's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he had been worried about her answer. "Good. That is good. I just wanted to make sure. You have been through a lot, leaving your home and traveling all this way alone. The last thing I want is to add to your burdens." "You have not," Penelope assured him. "If anything, you have made everything easier. And Tucker, I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you beyond what we have already agreed upon. The dance last night was lovely, and I have enjoyed getting to know you, but I understand if that was just a one-time thing. I do not want you to feel obligated to continue spending time with me." Tucker pulled the buggy to a stop abruptly, turning to face her fully. His amber eyes were intense, and there was something in his expression that made Penelope's breath catch. "Penelope Fairmont, that dance was not just a one-time thing, not for me. From the moment I saw you standing beside that broken wagon, refusing to let your fear show, I knew you were someone special. Spending time with you is not an obligation. It is a privilege. If you are willing, I would like to court you properly. I would like to see where this thing between us might lead." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I have only been in Amarillo for 2 days, she said, but her protest was weak even to her own ears. "I know," Tucker acknowledged. "And if you need more time, if you want to get settled and established before you think about courtship, I understand that. I will wait. But I wanted you to know my intentions, wanted you to know that this is not just kindness or charity. This is me, being drawn to you in a way I have never experienced before." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in admitting his feelings so openly, undid something in Penelope. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls to keep people out, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But Tucker Kendrick was not someone she needed protection from. He was someone who made her feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to admit what she wanted. "I do not need more time," she said softly. "I would like you to court me, Tucker. I would like to see where this leads as well." The smile that spread across Tucker's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Then that is what we will do," he said. "We will take this slow, let things develop naturally. There is no rush. We have time." But even as he said it, even as Penelope nodded in agreement, she could feel the pull between them, the sense that this thing they had found was rare and precious, and not to be taken lightly. Time might reveal whether what they felt was real and lasting, but Penelope already suspected she knew the answer. The days that followed fell into a pleasant routine. Penelope worked at Henderson's General Store 6 days a week, quickly proving herself to be capable and reliable. Mrs. Henderson raised her pay after just 2 weeks, clearly pleased with her new employee's performance. In the evenings, Tucker would pick her up from the store and drive her back to the ranch, and they would spend the ride talking about their days, their hopes, their pasts. Tucker told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the hard lessons of ranching life and the rewards of working with the land. Penelope told him about St. Louis, about her sister Charlotte and her father's businesses, about the slow suffocation she had felt as her choices became narrower and narrower, until finally she had to choose between her own life and the one others wanted for her. On Sundays, which was Penelope's day off, Tucker would take her on rides around the countryside, showing her the beauty of the Texas landscape. They picnicked by streams and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared values and complementary differences. Tucker was patient and respectful, never pushing for more than Penelope was ready to give. He held her hand when they walked, and sometimes he would steal a kiss on her cheek or forehead, but he seemed content to let their relationship develop at its own pace. Penelope appreciated his restraint even as she found herself wanting more, wanting to close the distance between them, and explore the depth of the feelings that were growing stronger with each passing day. Martha and Thomas watched the courtship with obvious approval, and even Zachary stopped teasing after it became clear that this was serious, that Tucker was not just dallying with a pretty stranger but genuinely falling in love. The whole Kendrick family seemed to have adopted Penelope as one of their own, and she felt the warmth of their acceptance like a balm on old wounds. 6 weeks after she had first broken down on that dusty road, Penelope had saved enough money to afford her own room at the boarding house in town. But when she mentioned this to Martha one evening, the older woman looked genuinely distressed. "You are not leaving us, are you?" Martha asked. "Penelope, you are welcome to stay here as long as you like. We love having you here." "I do not want to impose," Penelope said, though part of her was relieved by Martha's reaction. The truth was, she had come to think of the Kendrick Ranch as home, had come to think of this family as her family. The idea of leaving, even to move into town, filled her with unexpected sadness. "You are not imposing," Martha said firmly. "You are part of this family now, whether you stay or go, but I hope you will stay. Tucker would be heartbroken if you left, and honestly, so would I." Tucker, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Ma is right," he said. "But Penelope, if you feel like you need your own space, your own independence, then I understand that. I do not want you to feel obligated to stay just because we want you here." Penelope looked between them, feeling the weight of the choice before her. She could move into town, establish her independence, prove to herself that she could make it on her own. Or she could stay here in this place that had come to feel like home with these people who had welcomed her so completely. In the end, it was not really a choice at all. "I would like to stay," she said quietly. "If you are sure you do not mind, I would like to continue living here." The relief on both their faces made her smile, and when Tucker crossed the room to pull her into a hug, Penelope let herself lean into his embrace, let herself accept the comfort and affection he offered so freely. That night, after the family had gone to bed, Penelope sat out on the porch in the cool evening air, thinking about how much her life had changed in such a short time. She thought about Charlotte, back in St. Louis, and made a mental note to write another letter soon. She had been corresponding with her sister regularly, and Charlotte's responses were full of excitement about Penelope's new life and happiness, that her older sister had found somewhere she belonged. She heard the creak of the porch boards behind her and turned to find Tucker stepping out of the house, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one and then settled into the chair beside hers, his long legs stretched out before him. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "Just thinking," Penelope replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, "about how different everything is now compared to when I first arrived." "Good different or bad different? Good different," Penelope assured him. "Very good different. Sometimes I still cannot quite believe that I am here, that I found this place and you and your family. It feels almost too good to be true." Tucker reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "It is true," he said softly. "This is real, Penelope. What we have, it is real." She turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his face illuminated by the faint light spilling from the windows. "Tucker, I need to tell you something. I think I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I already have fallen in love with you. I know it has only been 6 weeks, and maybe that is not enough time to really know, but I cannot deny what I feel anymore." Tucker set his coffee cup down and turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Penelope, I fell in love with you the day I met you. I know it sounds impossible, but I looked at you standing there beside your broken wagon, and something in me just knew. You were the one I had been waiting for without even realizing I was waiting. These past 6 weeks have only confirmed what my heart already knew that first day." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy. "I was so scared when I came west," she admitted. "I was scared I would fail, scared I would end up worse off than I was in St. Louis. I never imagined I would find you." Tucker released one of her hands to cup her cheek gently, his thumb brushing away the single tear that had escaped. "You are the bravest person I know," he said. "You left everything you knew to chase something better, and you did it all on your own. That takes incredible courage." "I did not feel brave," Penelope confessed. "I felt terrified most of the time." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Tucker said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You are brave, Penelope. And I am so grateful that your wagon broke down on that particular stretch of road on that particular day. I am grateful that I got to be the one to find you, to help you, to fall in love with you." Then he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Penelope felt like she was melting, like everything inside her was turning soft and warm. She kissed him back, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Marry me, Penelope." Penelope pulled back just enough to see his face, to see the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. This was everything she had run away from in St. Louis, the idea of marriage, of tying her life to someone else's. But this was also completely different. Tucker was not trying to control her or own her. He was offering partnership, offering to build a life together where they both had choices, where they both had say in their future. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like freedom rather than surrender. "Yes, Tucker, I will marry you." His whoop of joy startled the horses in the nearby corral, and then he was lifting her out of her chair and spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her back down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Penelope felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Amarillo, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Penelope wore a dress that she and Mrs. Henderson had worked on together in the evenings after the store closed. Simple white cotton with delicate embroidery around the neckline and sleeves. Martha had cried when she first saw Penelope in it, and even Thomas had to clear his throat several times and blink rapidly. Charlotte was not able to come from St. Louis, but she had sent a long letter full of love and congratulations, and the news that she was saving money to visit as soon as she could manage it. Penelope read that letter the morning of her wedding and cried happy tears, grateful that her sister was supporting her choices even from so far away. Tucker waited for her at the altar, looking handsome and nervous in his best suit. His amber eyes locked on her as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tucker kissed her with such tenderness that Penelope felt her heart might burst. The celebration afterward was held at the Kendrick Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Penelope felt surrounded by love and acceptance in a way she had never experienced before. This was community, real community, and she was part of it now in a way that went beyond simply living in the same place as these people. As the sun began to set, and the party showed no signs of slowing down, Tucker pulled her aside and led her away from the crowd to a small grove of trees on the edge of the property. "I wanted to give you your wedding present in private," he explained, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small wooden box. "It is not much, but I made it myself. Penelope opened the box to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. She opened the locket and found 2 small spaces for photographs or miniature portraits. "I thought you might want to put a picture of Charlotte in one side," Tucker explained. "And maybe, someday, we could put a picture of our family in the other side, our children when we have them." Penelope looked up at him through happy tears. "It is perfect," she said. "Tucker, it is absolutely perfect." He took the locket from her and fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin for a moment. "I love you, Penelope Kendrick," he said, using her new name for the first time. "I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "I love you too," Penelope replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "And you have already made me happier than I ever thought possible." They kissed there in the grove as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Penelope thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A broken wagon, a chance encounter with a kind stranger, and a simple offer of payment in the form of a dance. Such small things to build a life on, and yet here she was, married to the man she loved, surrounded by family and friends, with a future stretching out before her bright with possibility. The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and discoveries. Tucker had built them a small house on the Kendrick property, close enough to the main house that they could easily share meals and work, but far enough away that they had privacy. It was not large, just 3 rooms to start, but it was theirs, and Penelope took pride in making it a home. She continued working at Henderson's General Store, though now she only worked 4 days a week instead of 6, using the extra time to help Martha with the ranch household and to start a small vegetable garden of her own. Tucker taught her to ride properly, patient with her initial clumsiness, and soon she was comfortable enough on horseback that she could accompany him on some of his ranch work. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, discovered each other's quirks and preferences. Tucker learned that Penelope was not a morning person and brought her coffee in bed on the days she did not have to work. Penelope learned that Tucker liked to read before sleep and made sure to keep the lamp on his side of the bed well supplied with oil. They argued occasionally, usually about small things, but they learned to talk through their disagreements, to find compromises that respected both their needs. The physical aspect of their marriage was a revelation to Penelope, who had been taught that such things were merely wifely duty to be endured. Tucker was patient and gentle, taking time to make sure she was comfortable and cared for, and Penelope discovered that intimacy could be a source of joy and connection rather than obligation. She felt treasured in Tucker's arms, valued not just for what she could provide but for who she was as a person. Late in their first year of marriage, Penelope realized her monthly courses had not come when expected. She waited another week, not wanting to say anything until she was sure, but when the nausea started and her breasts became tender, she could no longer deny what was happening. She was pregnant. She told Tucker one evening as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset. He had just come in from working the fence line, and she had made his favorite meal, and everything felt perfect and right. "Tucker, I have something to tell you," she said, reaching for his hand. He turned to her with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," she assured him, a smile spreading across her face. "Tucker, we are going to have a baby. I am pregnant." The expression on his face went through several rapid changes: shock, disbelief, and then pure joy. He pulled her into his arms so suddenly that she laughed, holding her close but carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he breathed against her hair. "Penelope, we are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father." "And I am going to be a mother," Penelope said, the reality of it hitting her fully for the first time. "A baby. Their baby. A child born out of love and partnership, a child who would grow up knowing they were wanted and cherished. It was everything she had not known she wanted, everything she had not let herself dream about during those long, uncertain weeks on the trail west. Martha was overjoyed when they told her the news, immediately launching into plans and preparations. Thomas shook Tucker's hand with quiet pride and told Penelope that any grandchild of his would be welcomed and loved. Even Zachary, who was now courting a girl from town himself, seemed excited about the prospect of becoming an uncle. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Penelope found the summer heat oppressive as her belly grew. Tucker was attentive and concerned, almost comically so, to the point where Penelope had to gently remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and perfectly capable of continuing most of her normal activities. Mrs. Henderson hired additional help for the store so that Penelope could reduce her hours as her due date approached, and in the evenings, Tucker would sit with her and feel the baby move, his face full of wonder every time he felt a kick or shift beneath his hand. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" Penelope asked him one evening as they lay in bed, Tucker's hand resting on her swollen belly. "I do not care," Tucker said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you come through the birth all right, that is all that matters to me. Though I will admit, the idea of a little girl with your eyes sounds pretty wonderful. And the idea of a little boy with your smile sounds pretty wonderful to me," Penelope replied with a laugh. Their son was born on a cool evening in late March of 1885, after a labor that was long but mercifully uncomplicated. Tucker stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when the midwife finally placed the squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Penelope felt a surge of love so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. "He is perfect," Tucker breathed, his finger tracing the baby's tiny hand with infinite gentleness. "Penelope, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Jacob Kendrick, after Tucker's father and Penelope's late grandfather, and from the moment of his birth, little Tommy was the center of their universe. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching Tucker with their son filled Penelope with a contentment she had never imagined possible. The months and years that followed were full of the beautiful chaos of raising a child while building a life. Tommy grew from infant to toddler, learning to walk and talk and get into every possible form of mischief. Tucker and Penelope expanded their little house, adding 2 more bedrooms in anticipation of future children. When Tommy was 2, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Martha, after Penelope's mother and Tucker's. Clara had her father's amber eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she wrapped everyone around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. Charlotte finally made her promised visit when Clara was 6 months old, staying for an entire month and marveling at how happy and settled her sister had become. She fell in love with Texas and with Amarillo, and when she returned to St. Louis, it was only to settle her affairs and pack her belongings. Within 6 months, Charlotte had moved to Amarillo permanently, taking a job as a schoolteacher and renting a room in town. The bond between the sisters, strained by distance and time, healed and strengthened, and Penelope was grateful beyond words to have Charlotte nearby. Tommy and Clara adored their Aunt Charlotte, and she in turn doted on them shamelessly. Years passed in a blur of happiness punctuated by the usual challenges of life. Droughts came and were endured. There were hard winters and hot summers, good years and lean years. Thomas Kendrick passed away peacefully in his sleep when Tommy was 8, and the whole family mourned the loss of a good man. Martha continued to live in the main house, increasingly frail but still sharp as a tack, dispensing wisdom and affection to her expanding brood of grandchildren. Tucker took over more of the ranch management as the years progressed, and he proved to be as good a rancher as his father had been. The Kendrick Ranch prospered under his leadership, and he and Penelope were able to provide a comfortable life for their children. Penelope eventually stopped working at the general store, though she and Mrs. Henderson remained close friends until the older woman's death. Instead, Penelope focused her energies on her family and on contributing to the community in other ways. She helped establish a lending library in Amarillo and served on the school board, working to ensure that all children in the area had access to education. Tommy grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to follow in his father's footsteps. Clara was bright and spirited, constantly pushing boundaries and asking questions that made her parents simultaneously proud and exasperated. 2 more children followed. A son they named Matthew, who arrived when Clara was 4, and another daughter, Rose, born 3 years later. Through it all, through the joys and sorrows and mundane dailiness of life, Tucker and Penelope's love for each other only deepened. They still took rides together on Sunday afternoons when they could manage it, still sat on their porch in the evenings watching the sunset and talking about their day. Tucker still brought her coffee in bed on lazy mornings, and Penelope still made sure his reading lamp was always filled with oil. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Tucker took Penelope back to the spot where her wagon had broken down all those years ago. The road had been improved since then, graded and maintained, but the basic geography was the same. They stood together in the fading light, holding hands, remembering the young people they had been and marveling at the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Tucker asked quietly. "Accepting my offer that day, agreeing to pay for wagon repairs with a dance." Penelope turned to look at him, seeing the touches of gray in his hair, the deeper lines around his eyes, all the marks of a life well lived. She thought about everything that had come from that one moment of chance and choice: the marriage, the children, the home, the love that had sustained them through 2 decades of life together. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That was the best bargain I ever made. One dance in exchange for a lifetime of happiness. I would make that trade again in a heartbeat." Tucker pulled her close, and they stood together as the sun set over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could see the lights of Amarillo beginning to glow, and beyond that, the dark shape of the Kendrick Ranch where their children waited. "I love you, Penelope Kendrick," Tucker murmured against her hair. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with a strange payment plan." "I love you too," Penelope replied, smiling against his chest. "And thank you for being exactly the kind of man worth taking a chance on." They stood there until the stars began to emerge, bright and clear in the darkening sky, and then they climbed back into their buggy and headed home together, just as they had been doing for 20 years and would continue to do for the rest of their lives. The children grew and eventually began lives of their own. Tommy married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and took over the day-to-day management of the Kendrick holdings. Clara, true to her independent spirit, became a nurse and moved to Dallas for several years before eventually returning to Amarillo with a doctor husband in tow. Matthew became a teacher like his Aunt Charlotte, and Rose married young and gave Tucker and Penelope their first grandchildren. Tucker and Penelope moved into a smaller house in town as they aged, leaving the ranch in Tommy's capable hands, but remaining deeply involved in their children's and grandchildren's lives. They became the kind of grandparents who always had cookies and stories, who never seemed too busy to listen, who created a haven of love and acceptance for everyone who walked through their door. Charlotte never married, but she had a long and fulfilling career as an educator and was beloved by generations of Amarillo's children. She lived to be 93, surrounded by family, and when she passed, it was with Penelope holding her hand, just as Penelope had dreamed of during those lonely months after first leaving St. Louis. On a warm spring evening in 1923, 40 years after that first fateful meeting on a dusty road, Tucker and Penelope sat on their porch in Amarillo, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. Tucker was 86 years old now, his dark hair completely silver, his body bent slightly by decades of hard work. Penelope was 82, her own hair white as snow, her hands marked by age spots and the gentle tremor that had developed in recent years. But when Tucker took her hand, just as he had done countless times over their 4 decades together, Penelope felt the same spark, the same sense of rightness that she had felt that very first time. Their life together had not always been easy. They had weathered losses and disappointments, had faced challenges both expected and surprising. But through it all, they had faced everything together, partners in the truest sense of the word. "You remember the dance?" Tucker asked, his voice softer now than it had been in his youth, but still holding that warmth that had first drawn her to him. "I remember everything about that night," Penelope replied, squeezing his hand gently. "The music, the crowd, the way you held me. But most of all, I remember thinking that I had finally found where I belonged." "With me," Tucker said, and it was not quite a question. "With you," Penelope confirmed. "Always with you." They sat together as the evening deepened into night, surrounded by the evidence of their love in the form of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the form of a community they had helped build and nurture, in the form of a life well lived and shared. And if either of them thought about the improbability of it all, about how one broken wagon and one kind offer had led to this rich tapestry of family and love, they kept those thoughts to themselves. Some things, after all, were simply meant to be. And Penelope Fairmont Kendrick, looking back across 4 decades of marriage to Tucker Kendrick, knew with absolute certainty that their love story was one of those rare and precious things, a gift given by chance but kept through choice, day after day, year after year, until chance and choice became indistinguishable from each other and from the love itself. Tucker passed peacefully in his sleep 3 months after that evening, with Penelope beside him as she had been for 40 years. Penelope followed him just 8 months later, and though their children mourned, there was comfort in knowing that their parents had lived full, happy lives and had loved each other completely until the very end. They were buried side by side in the Amarillo cemetery, their headstones simple but bearing an inscription that Tommy had chosen. Tucker and Penelope Kendrick, the best bargain ever made, one dance for a lifetime of love. And in the years that followed, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story of how it all began, of a broken wagon and a cowboy's unusual request for payment, of a dance that led to a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It became a family legend, passed down through the generations, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as chance encounters on dusty roads, and that the greatest gifts are often those we do not even know we are looking for until we find them. The story of Tucker and Penelope became part of Amarillo's history, woven into the fabric of the community they had helped build. And though they were long gone, their legacy lived on in the values they had embodied: kindness, fairness, love, and the belief that everyone deserved a chance at happiness, no matter how broken their wagon or how empty their purse. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West of 1883, nurtured through decades of partnership and commitment, and ultimately transcending death itself to become something eternal. And it all started with one simple offer: payment for wagon repairs in the form of one dance. One dance that changed everything. One dance that built a life. One dance that proved love could be found in the most unexpected places, if only you were brave enough to take the chance when it was offered.